Hey up everyone, welcome to the video. Tonight, the title of this video is going to be every NRL club's unwanted history. So obviously out there, everyone has a club that they support and they've had good moments and they like to talk about those moments a lot and a lot of stats from the past, but there's certain aspects of every club that they have moments that they're not particularly proud of and don't want people to remember, and they don't really talk about them too much. So tonight I'm going to go through every 16 clubs out there and go through their unwanted history. I'm going to start this list with the team that's coming first, and I'm going to work my way down to 16. So obviously in first place at the moment it's going to be Penrith. So starting with the first one, Penrith, their unwanted history. It took them 18 years to meet their first final series. So they were founded in 1967. They didn't make the finals until 1985, but it was 23 years until they won their first finals game in 1990. So they made a couple of finals games in between 1985 and 1990, but for some reason or another they couldn't win, and it was 23 long years for Penrith before they actually got a win in a finals game. The next team on the list is Melbourne. With Melbourne, they hold the record for the biggest loss in a grand final, which was 40-0 against Manly in 2008. It eclipsed the previous biggest grand final loss, which was St George in 1975. And then as well, you've got the salary cap. So every single time, maybe once or twice a week, or who knows how many times a day, Melbourne get reminded of that salary cap. That's an unwanted part of the history, and they also have the biggest grand final loss. Moving on to the next club, Parramatta. Parramatta's got a few things that I probably could mention, but one that probably most people wouldn't know is that the club holds the record for the most consecutive wooden spoons, which is 6. So between 1956 and 1961, the club come last 6 times in a row, which is a record that no other clubs come close to. So that is Parramatta's unwanted history. The next club, South, the pride of the league, South Sydney. But it hasn't always been smooth sailing for South. They have a few unwanted histories. One of the first ones is that they have one of the longest grand final droughts in the history of the code. They have the second most wooden spoons out of any of the current NRL sides with 8. And they're one of only 3 sides in history to go winless in a season when they didn't win a single game in 1946. And now we move on to Eastern Suburbs, also known as the Sydney Roosters. They're the last team to go winless in a year, which was in 1966. They also have the second longest losing streak of any club in the NRL in the history of the game in Australia, with 25 games. This spanned 2 years, so from 1965 to 1967 to the early parts of 1967, the club didn't win a single game. Now we move on to Manly Warringah. Manly's got a proud history, but there's a couple of things that I bet you some Manly fans don't want you to know. One of them is that the club took 25 years to win their first premiership, which is one of the longest times it took any club to win their first premiership. And also, in order to win that first premiership, they lost 5 grand finals before they actually won the first one, which was, I think, a record for the most amount of grand finals lost before a club finally won their first premiership. The next club on the list is St George. St George, like Manly, have had a pretty good history overall, pretty squeaky clean. But for St George, they had a 31-year drought between 1979 and 2010, if you count St George and St George Illawarra as the same club, which a lot of people do, me included. And in between then, they lost 5 grand finals. And it gets brought up whenever St George are having a bad time, the whole drag chokes, the chokers tag comes out, especially when it comes to finals. So that is something that St George fans would probably like to forget, is that 31-year drought. And now we move on to the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast, one of their things that I bet you they don't want you to know, maybe in the future, I think it's still fresh in some people's minds, is that they went 364 days without winning a game of rugby league. It's also their 5th go at having a franchise on the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast Titans is the 5th incarnation of a franchise, and they've won 5 wooden spoons in total. And if you count all the Gold Coast clubs as one club per se, or if you count it as a region, they've had a 33-year drought waiting for the first premiership as a region, as the Gold Coast. So a long time waiting if you've been supporting some of the older Gold Coast sides. The next club we move on to is the New Zealand Warriors. Now, they have the third longest wait for a first premiership in NRL New South Wales Rugby League history. 26 years they've been waiting for that first premiership, and they've got a few more years to go before they reach the second place team. The next club we move on to is Nick from Australia's side, North Queensland. It took them 9 years to reach their first final series. It also took them 9 years to beat their arch rivals Brisbane in a game of rugby league. It took them 20 years to win their first premiership, and in between then, they had 3 wooden spoons, and they almost come last on a couple of other occasions, most notably 2010, when if it wasn't for Melbourne's salary cap scandal, they most certainly would have come last. And now we move on to the Green Machine, Canberra. Did you know between 1997 and 2016 they didn't make a single preliminary final? They did make finals, yes, but they didn't reach the third week of the finals for nearly 20 years. They also took 25 years to reach their next grand final. So between 1994 to 2019, no grand finals. And they're currently 9th on the longest list for the premiership drought. So they sit at 9th at the moment, but that could extend if they don't win one in the future. Now we move on to the Newcastle Club. Did you know it's been 20 years since they last won the premiership? So 2001 was the last year that they won the premiership. They're also the only club in the NRL era to come last 3 times in a row. Clubs have done it previously when it wasn't the NRL, but Newcastle is the only club to come last 3 years in a row in the NRL era. Now we move on to Cronulla Sutherland. Up, Cronulla it seems, but not always. Do you know it took them 49 years to win their first premiership, longer than any other club in the history of the game in Australia. They also suffered the third biggest loss in NRL history and New South Wales Rugby League history when they were beaten 74 points to 4 by Parramatta in 2003. And now we go on to the West Tigers. West Tigers have the record for the longest drought in the NRL era and the longest current finals drought in the NRL era. The club also set a new unwanted record in 2020 when they were the first side since the competition began in 1908 to concede 24 points or more in a game for 10 consecutive matches. So that's not something that I bet you West Tigers fans want you to know. The next club on the list is Brisbane. Now, Brisbane's got a proud history. They've got lots to boast about, but there's one thing that they don't want to boast about, and that's the fact that they suffered the biggest ever finals loss in the history of the New South Wales Rugby League / NRL competition, when they were beaten 58-0 by Parramatta in 2019. And now, coming on to our last team, last but not least, Calorie Bankstown. Did you know that they've suffered the 2 biggest losses in New South Wales Rugby League NRL history? In 1935, they were beaten 91 points to 6 by St George, and then the following week, they were beaten 87 points to 7 by Eastern Suburbs. They're also the only club to win a premiership, which they did in 1942, and then finish with back-to-back wooden spoons in 1943 and 1944. Only club to do that. They're also one of only 2 teams to actually play a game of rugby league, first grade rugby league, and not score a single point. In 1982, they played against Newtown and they played out a 0-0 draw at Henson Park, the only time in Premiership history that occurred. They also had a 38-year Premiership drought between 1942 and 1980, and they only made 2 grand finals in between there. So a very long time, and one of the longest droughts in the New South Wales Rugby League NRL history overall. So I bet you Calorie Bankstown don't want you to know about that. Now, with all these clubs, next time you're having a bit of a war of words with someone, or you're sledging someone, and someone wants to have a go at your club, maybe take some of these facts from this video and throw it back at them. This is a video that is educational. I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section below what videos you'd like me to do in the future, and let me know your thoughts about the video in the section below, and hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully you share this video when you liked it. So this is Rugby League History, signing off. I hope you all have a good weekend. My next video will be the Parramatta video, the review on Saturday against South Sydney. It will be an interesting game. Hopefully Brad Arthur has thrown in a smoke screen and he hasn't named Wonga Blake, and it's actually Marata Niakari that's going to be playing at centre. Otherwise I think South are going to win 13 plus. But anyway, this is Rugby League History, signing off, and I'll catch us all later in that video. Alright, tatty bye now.